Welcome to the Sci-Fi Evolution channel. When the ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss, she spoke softly, her voice trembling with quiet terror. If this data archive contains the coordinates of the vaults, Zaid, it could lead to the destruction of entire civilizations. The precursor weapons are planet killers, and some are even worse. Her fingers tightened around his as she trailed off, her shoulders shaking under the thin fabric of her jumpsuit. He turned to her, reaching out to brush a lock of blonde hair out of her eyes. "I won't let that happen," he said. His voice was deep and determined, but he exuded the quiet power of unwavering determination. "But we won't do it alone. We will look for allies, people who prioritize the protection of lives rather than personal gain." Eris's lips trembled slightly before she nodded, blinking rapidly so that tears wouldn't cloud her vision. They boarded the ship, with Zaid securing the hatch as Eris stowed her bag in the corner of the cabin and settled into her seat. He quickly activated the engines, feeling the vibrations reverberate through the floor panels and up his legs like a grounding sensation that reminded him of his vitality and forward movement. The navigation system flickered as Eris bypassed the standard launch procedures to speed up the launch sequence. Outside, the clamps on the hangar detached with loud mechanical clicks that echoed through the thin seals of the airlock. Zaid reached out to briefly grab Eris's hand, feeling her pulse racing under her smooth green skin. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes, but behind that fear burned her unwavering determination, the same quiet strength he had come to rely on more than he would ever admit out loud. They rose smoothly into the silent void, leaving the station behind as the engines roared to full power. Zaid adjusted their trajectory away from the shattered moon, maneuvering between drifting mine debris and debris in orbit. The tethers freed themselves from the gravitational pull of the moon, and suddenly proximity alarms began to sound on their console screens. Red warning lights were flashing in the cockpit as a fleet of cartel gunboats appeared on their sensors, blocking their path. Zaid cursed under his breath, activating the rear shields while Eris carefully studied the tactical readings. "There are 6 gunboats," she said, her fingers flying over the controls as she calculated intercept vectors. "Standard VR cartel models with heavy frontal armor and weak abdominal protection. They expect us to charge right through." Zaid clenched his jaw, feeling the adrenaline rush through his veins. "Then let's do something unexpected," he said, opening the secondary panel next to his throttle lever. There, he discovered a series of small switches connected to Eris enhancements. "Do you think your engine switches will handle full thrust?" Zaid asked. "Can we reverse the polarity without damaging the coils?" He glanced at Eris, with a small smile on his face that belied the worry he was feeling. Eris's eyes widened slightly before narrowing in determination. "If you redirect the stabilizer through the rear array of capacitors while I disconnect the emission dampers," she said with unshakable confidence, "we can do it." Zaid nodded, his voice low. "Yes, but we only have 15 cycles before the containment field collapses," he replied. As Eris's fingers danced across the console, reconfiguring the energy flow at lightning speed, the ship trembled as the propulsion coils charged with reverse plasma polarity, sending the quantum awakening into a steep dive towards the surface of the moon. The cartel's gunboats adjusted their course to match, their plasma cannons flashing blue as they unleashed a barrage on the ship's shields. Zaid maneuvered the ship sharply, feeling the hull shake from the violent impacts, before he firmly applied the controls. The quantum awakening took off in a fierce arc, defying the weak gravity of the moon and hitting the gunboat formation from below. The ship's belly shields flared as Eris redirected energy from the life support systems to the forward thrusters, pushing them forward with a sudden jerk that passed by the surprised gunboats before they could aim their guns. Eris gasped as alarms sounded, warning of the increasing instability of containment. "5 cycles," she shouted, her voice strained. Zaid did not hesitate. He flipped the polarity switch again, stabilizing the motors as the coils reached their maximum output. The ship shook violently, but it held together, breaking through the blockade while the gunboats rushed after them in disarray. There was a moment of silence. When they left the gravitational pull of the moon and went into the vast space, Eris sank back into her chair, trembling with exhaustion and relief. Zaid's hands, still shaking from the strain, loosened their grip on the controls. He turned to Eris, noticing the sheen of sweat on her green skin and the heavy rise and fall of her breasts. Without hesitation, Zaid reached out and pulled Eris into his arms. She curled up against his chest, clutching his suit with trembling fingers. Silent tears soaked the fabric as she buried her face in his shirt, her body shaking with sobs of fear and relief. "I thought we were going to die this time," she whispered, her voice breaking. Zaid gently caressed Eris's hair, offering her comfort with gentle words and a reassuring touch. "It's okay, we've done it," he said, his voice strong and confident. "We're safe now." He gently pressed his lips to her temple, his voice trembling despite his efforts to remain calm for her sake. "Not today," he whispered. "We're still here, Eris, and as long as I'm breathing, no one will ever take you away." They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the engines beneath them like a soothing lullaby in the dark. After a moment, she pulled back slightly, her blue eyes shining with tears and something deeper, a quiet, indestructible love that took root in her heart. "Then let's finish this," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Let's get this over with before anyone else gets hurt." Zaid nodded silently, stroking her cheek with his thumb before returning to the controls. Ahead lay a galaxy filled with danger and deception, secrets too vast to contain in one lifetime. But when he felt her little hand tighten around his, he knew they would face this together. Zaid and Eris linked their arms, and they knew with unshakable confidence that together they could defeat anything. Zaid set course for the outer colonies, his fingers expertly manipulating the controls as Eris worked beside him, reconfiguring the energy systems and adjusting the damaged stabilizers from their last dangerous maneuver. The cabin was quiet, except for the soft hum of engines and the occasional beep of switching indicators. But there was no tension in the silence. It was a silence of trust and determination, not fear. Eris's small hands moved with smooth confidence across the control panel, her bright blue eyes darting between diagrams and energy readings. Sometimes she would remove her blonde bob from her face with a quick flick of her wrist. Her green skin glowed faintly in the dim cabin light. Zaid watched her out of the corner of his eye, feeling a rush of warmth spread through his chest, dispelling the fatigue and apprehension that weighed on him like a leaden burden. The way she worked, her unwavering dedication to the task at hand, despite everything they had been through, filled him with a deep sense of admiration. He pondered Bane's words, reflecting on the artifact's potential as a precursor to the harmonic core, which hid archives of weapons storage locations and ancient star maps, possibly containing keys to unlocking powerful technology capable of transforming entire civilizations or destroying them. He knew perfectly well what the cartels would do with such force. They could hold entire sectors hostage and use entire planetary populations as bargaining chips, expanding their influence. The thought filled him with anger and protective instinct. His jaw clenched as anger and determination swept through him. Glancing at Eris, he noticed her slight trembling despite her outward calmness. He reached out and gently placed a rough, oil-stained hand on hers, causing her to flinch slightly at his unexpected touch. She relaxed under his warmth, looking up at him with bright blue eyes that twinkled with worry and fear. "We'll get this over with, Eris," he said softly, his voice low but carrying the quiet force of unwavering determination. "No matter what, we won't let them turn this into another weapon for their empire. We will destroy it before that happens." Eris's lips trembled slightly, but she nodded, her fingers tightening around his arm with surprising strength. "I know," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. And I trust you, Zaid. You're the only one I trust more than anyone else. Her words had touched something deep inside him, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Before he could respond, proximity alarms flashed red on their console, interrupting the moment with sudden urgency. Zaid turned back to the controls. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the tactical display. Several signatures were approaching from the starboard side. Their radiation signatures were familiar and undesirable. Cartel interceptors, he thought with a growl. His breathing quickened, and his hands flew over the throttle controls as he redirected energy from non-essential systems to enhance the shield's integrity. How did they find them so quickly? His fingers spread out over the navigation console, accessing the encrypted frequencies of the transponder. His eyes widened in sudden horror as he realized what was happening. "It's not just interceptors," he said quickly, his voice trembling with urgency. "They're transmitting the command codes of the VR cartel." Zaid's heart sank at the realization. Bringing in an entire fleet meant that they intended to end this once and for all. They wanted to either capture or destroy them before any secrets could leak beyond the cartel's control. He glanced at Eris, seeing fear flash in her eyes before she masked it with cold concentration. "We won't be able to outrun the entire fleet," she whispered, shaking her head as tears welled up in her eyes. "The inversion trick. They will block our exit vectors before we can jump." Zaid felt a chill of fear run through him, but it was fleeting. His determination burned him out. "We're not running," he said softly, his voice steady and unwavering. "We lure them in and take what they're fighting for." Eris looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise and confusion. "What do you mean?" He met her gaze, his jaw clenched in a grim expression. "We will destroy the artifact right here, right now. If they can't get it, it will end today." Eris looked at him for a moment, her eyes glistening with tears. Then she nodded slowly, her shoulders shaking with determination. "Let's do this," she whispered, her voice small but filled with determination. She pulled the bag forward, unzipped it, and revealed a soft suitcase containing a precursor core. The artifact was pulsing. The delicate, pale blue light cast an eerie, rhythmic glow on Eris' green skin, making her eyes shine like distant galaxies. Zaid watched as her tiny hands worked quickly, opening the containment seals and connecting her portable analysis device to the core's open lattice array. "If I destabilize the harmonic matrix," she said softly, her fingers flying over the interface, "it will cause a cascade of explosions, making the data unrecoverable." "But what?" asked Zaid, his gaze darting between her and the interceptors rapidly approaching their position. Eris hesitated, tears welled up in her eyes, and whispered, "The containment release protocol requires manual control at the core grid node. I can't do it remotely. I have to physically access the matrix to release the fuses before I can trigger a data reset." Zaid felt a sharp pain in his chest when he realized what she was saying. "How dangerous is it?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. Eris met his gaze, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's going to kill me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Harmonic resonance will overload my neural pathways in a matter of cycles, but it's the only way to ensure that no one else gets this information." The cockpit lights flickered as the cartel ships approached. Zaid reached out and gently cupped her face, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. His own vision blurred as he spoke. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There must be another way, Eris." She shook her head, her small hands gripping his wrists. "This is my destiny," she said, her voice breaking. "My people need me." Zaid was speechless, his chest constricted from the excruciating pain that stole his breath. He pulled Eris into a fierce embrace, burying his face in her blonde hair as silent tears streamed down his cheeks. Outside the cockpit, the cartel ships formed a tight formation, their weapons on alert. Eris pulled back slightly, placing her small green hand on his cheek with a trembling smile. "Thank you," she whispered softly, "for letting me see the stars with you, for making me feel alive." Before he could stop her, she turned back to the console, her fingers moving with unwavering determination as she completed the detonation sequence. Zaid looked at her with eyes full of tears, his heart pounding with fear as he knew what was about to happen. Outside, the cartel's flagship loomed in the distance, its weapon glowing menacingly as it aimed at their vulnerable ship, ready to destroy them if they failed. In that moment of silence, when Eris activated the last switch, Zaid felt as if a part of himself had died with her. Eris's fingers hovered over the last shift button, her small shoulders shaking as silent tears streamed down her green cheeks. The artifact on the console glowed brightly, casting an eerie light on her delicate features, making Zaid's chest ache with pain. The cartel fleet was moving closer through the cockpit window, the massive hull of the flagship bristling with charged plasma cannons aimed directly at them. The tactical display was blinking with warnings about the proximity and capture of the target, flashing red. "I love you, Eris," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I will always love you, and I will never forgive myself if I let you go." She smiled softly, her fingers tracing the lines of his face. "I know, Zaid. And I love you too. But this is my destiny, and I have to fulfill it. I will not fail. I won't let them win." With a final, heartbreaking hug, they parted, their eyes locked in a silent promise of love and sacrifice. Eris turned away, her steps resolute as she approached the control panel. Zaid watched her leave, his heart aching with grief and love. He knew he couldn't stop her, but he would always be there, waiting for her to return. And so, with a final, silent prayer, Eris activated the self-destruct sequence. The world around them shuddered, and the stars above them went out one by one. But at this moment, when the galaxy was consumed by darkness, Zaid knew that Eris had not failed. She fulfilled her destiny, and by doing so, she saved a galaxy that would never know her name. His tears fell onto her cheeks, mixing with her own. The cockpit shook as the flagship fired its guns, the glowing barrels illuminating the void with a deadly blue light. "I can't lose you," he said, his voice choking under the weight of everything he couldn't say in time. "I just found you, and I can't let you go." She reached up, her small green hands wrapped around his wrists, her touch trembling but filled with quiet determination. "You gave me a home, Zaid," she whispered, her lips brushing his as tears flowed freely down her cheeks. "You've given me everything I've ever wanted, to be seen, to trust, to be loved." Her voice trailed off on the last word. A sob escaped her throat, and Zaid pulled her close to his chest, feeling her small figure shaking with quiet grief. Outside, the flagship's guns began their final aiming sequence, the cockpit screens flashing urgent countdown timings to impact as the plasma coils reached critical ignition. Suddenly, a flash of blue light caught Zaid's attention on the console. He looked at the diagnostic channel and saw a secondary data line indicating 42% compatibility of the neural interface. He blinked, feeling a mixture of hope and fear surge through his chest as his mind raced with possibilities. "Eris, wait," Zaid said urgently, grabbing her wrist before she could activate the switch. "What if we use the ship's stabilizer harmonics to secure the release of the grid, instead of relying on your neural signature? This will overload the entire stabilizer array and potentially lead to the disintegration of the ship." Zaid explained his idea, detailing how he would separate the primary emission dampers and use overload feedback to power the front engines. The plan would mean losing the engines, but it might give them enough time to destroy the core remotely without requiring direct neural input from Eris. Eris's eyes widened in disbelief, her face glistening with tears. Zaid's mind raced, adrenaline sharpening his concentration with painful clarity. He realized that they might lose the engines, but the stabilizers might still hold out for a while. Eris's lips parted as her eyes darted around the console, her mind racing with calculations. For a brief moment, her expression changed from sadness to intense concentration, and the tears stopped falling. "It might work," she whispered, her voice trembling with fragile hope. However, Zaid knew that if the stabilizers failed before the sequence was completed, the feedback would cause the ship to explode, resulting in their deaths. "Then we will die together," he said firmly. "I won't leave you alone," he added. She stared at him for a long moment. Tears welled up in her eyes, and a sob escaped her lips. "Okay," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Let's do this." Without hesitation, she began to reconfigure the switching protocols, her small green fingers flying around the console at breakneck speed. Meanwhile, Zaid reached over her to open the maintenance panel above his seat, accessing the stabilizer connection relay. Sparks flew down his arm as he tore off the protective pins of the muffler, ignoring the searing pain from the exposed plasma wiring burning on his jumpsuit sleeve. The ship shook violently as the stabilizers disconnected from the engine's polarity controls, and a low frequency hum grew under their feet as the harmonic frequencies shifted dangerously toward collapse. 30 cycles until collision with the flagship," Eris said urgently, her gaze darting between the console displays and Zaid's trembling hands as he bypassed the last safety measures. "Zaid, are you ready?" He looked at her, his face streaked with sweat and tears, and gently cupped her cheek with his burned hand. "With you always," he replied. She stifled a sob and pressed her lips to his in a fierce, desperate kiss, her tears wetting his mouth and her small fingers curling into his chest, holding him close as if she could keep them both anchored against the oncoming darkness. She turned back to the control panel, her eyes shining with unwavering determination as she initiated the final switch procedure. The artifact glowed brighter than ever, filling the cabin with blinding blue light. Harmonic frequencies echoed throughout the ship's structure, causing every panel and bolt to vibrate on the verge of structural failure. With the stabilizers held at 70%, Zaid shouted over the deafening sound of tearing metal. His burned hands clutched the connection relay as the cabin lights flickered violently. "The sequence has advanced to 92%. "Come on, Eris," he shouted. "We're almost there." When the critical cascade reached its peak, the woman shouted back. Her eyes were glued to the final confirmation of the data reset, tears streaming down her face. Just a few more cycles. Plasma shells fired from the flagship were rushing towards their defenseless ship with a deafening roar. The cockpit alarm was wailing loudly, and time seemed to slow down. Zaid looked Eris straight in the eyes. The world narrowed to her tear-stained face and shining blue eyes full of love and unwavering determination. "I love you," he croaked, his voice cracking with sincerity coming from the very depths of his soul. "I love you too," she whispered back, her trembling lips curled into a tearful smile. The artifact pulsed brightly one last time, after which the core violently exploded. A quiet, blue-white wave of energy burst out, destroying the incoming plasma projectiles and forcing the flagship to retreat. A blinding light filled the cabin, and for a moment there was complete silence. The silence was deafening. The waves of overload overwhelmed them, leaving behind only darkness and the faint hum of a dying ship drifting aimlessly in the void. But two hearts continued to beat in the broken walls of the ship. Zaid woke up in a world of darkness, illuminated only by the dim emergency lights flickering on the cabin ceiling. For a moment, his mind was clear, remaining in a state of daze and silence. Then, a sharp pain shot through his injured arm and chest, causing him to let out a low moan that was drowned out by the low hum of life support systems failing. With great effort, he opened his eyes completely. The console screens were smashed and extinguished, smoke rose from the torn boards. The floor was strewn with glass fragments from the overhead displays, which crunched under his gloved fingers as he tried to sit up in his chair. With every movement, a new wave of agony swept through his body. Panting, he shifted to the side, his fear piercing through the fog of exhaustion as he searched for Eris. She was slumped forward, unconscious in her chair. Her seatbelts were fastened, her blonde hair was spilling over her closed eyes, and her small green hands lay limply on the console. "Eris," he said, his voice hoarse with worry. He reached out and gently shook her, ignoring the pain in his injured arm as he tried to wake her up. For a long moment, she didn't react, her body motionless and lifeless in the dim light. But then she moved slightly and took an uneven breath as her eyes flew open, revealing bright blue eyes that were glassy with pain. A sob of relief escaped his throat before he could stop it, and he cupped her face in his trembling hands, tears streaming down his cheeks. She blinked slowly and smiled faintly, her voice weak but alive. "We did it," she whispered, her words barely audible over the fading hum of the ship's systems. Zaid laughed, half sobbing, half relieved, and nodded. He quickly wiped a smudge of soot from her cheek with his thumb. "Yes," he gasped, his voice cracking. "Yes, Eris, we did it. There is no core. There is no data available. The cartel will no longer be able to harm anyone with their help." Her eyelids fluttered, and a tear rolled down her cheek as she took a shaky breath. "Okay," she whispered softly, her small fingers finding his burned hand as he cupped her face. She held on to him with what little strength she had left in her trembling body. "That's good." Outside the cockpit, the porthole was filled with silent debris. Twisted metal from the flagship's forward cannons, torn off by the shock wave. Smaller cartel boats, tumbling aimlessly after their systems, were overwhelmed by a data explosion. The flagship itself drifted aimlessly in the distance, its engines dark, its weapons inoperable, its imposing hull no longer a threat. Zaid turned to her, and their eyes met. "We did it, Eris. We saved the world." Eris felt a sense of calm envelop her, despite the pain and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her again. "You saved us all, Eris," Zaid whispered, gently wiping another tear from her cheek with his thumb as her eyes closed for a moment under his touch. "You saved everyone, and you saved me," she replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. A soft, tired laugh escaped her when she opened her eyes again, her gaze shining faintly in the dim emergency lighting. "We saved each other," she whispered softly, her voice barely audible. They sat there for a long moment, their foreheads pressed against each other, as the dark cabin hummed softly around them. The only sounds were their uneven breathing and the faint crackle of cooling metal. Finally, Zaid forced himself to move, unbuckling Eris's straps with trembling hands and carefully lifting her into his arms. She seemed so small and light in his arms, her body trembling against his chest. Holding her tightly, he felt her tears wet his suit as she buried her face in his neck. He slowly stood up, stifling a groan as pain shot through his injured arm. He carried her through the quiet ship to the crew quarters, guided by emergency lights that flickered along the floor. He walked past sparking cables and overturned crates, his arm throbbing with pain. The Quantum Awakening was in a deplorable state, with its engine shut down, its stabilizers damaged, and its main power source drained to its last flickering light. But they were alive, and that was enough. He gently laid Eris on a small cot in the corner, feeling her fingers weakly squeeze his injured arm as he sat down next to her. His tired body leaned forward, and his forehead pressed against hers again. "What now?" she whispered softly, her bright blue eyes searching for him in the dim light, still shining with pain, but filled with something deeper, something that burned quietly despite her tears and exhaustion hope. Zaid took a soft, tired breath, brushing a lock of blonde hair from her eyes. A tired smile curved his chapped lips. "Now we're resting," he whispered softly, his voice heavy with quiet confidence. "Then we will recover together." Her trembling lips curved into a faint, tortured smile, and her eyes closed again, her small green fingers curling slightly around his arm. She was breathing weakly, her voice fading into the quiet hum of emergency life support equipment. Zaid stared at her for a long moment, His chest constricted. The emotion was so strong that it took away every breath and every coherent thought, leaving only the blinding certainty that she was his only goal. Carefully, he kissed her gently on the forehead, feeling her relax under his touch as her breathing became a calm, even rhythm. He stayed by her side, watching her sleep as the ship drifted in the void. The battered hull of the Quantum Awakening glowed faintly in the light of a distant blue star. After a long time, the soft crackle of the communication system broke the silence, and a friendly voice echoed through the speakers, greeting them with cautious optimism. Zaid stood up, his legs shaking from exhaustion, and kissed Eris one last time before responding. Help was on the way, repairs, restoration, the way back to the galaxy, whatever life awaited them beyond this broken moment. There, watching the console's flickering lights gradually turn to steady green as the emergency beacons responded, he realized that none of this mattered as long as Eris was by his side. Neither cartels, nor fleets, nor ancient relics could ever be more important than the little Australian woman who restored his ship with trembling hands, who looked into his wreckage with shining blue eyes, and who quietly asked him with quiet hope if she could accompany him forever. When the rescue ship connected to their damaged hull, filling the quiet corridor with warm lights, he turned back to where Eris was sleeping peacefully and smiled despite the tears in his eyes. For eternity was exactly what he intended to offer her.